If you're watching this, it's possible that something has already been found. Not announced, not explained, but quietly acknowledged. It began the way most uncomfortable discoveries begin. With data. Astronomers didn't see it at first. They noticed what shouldn't have been missing. A region of space where background radiation behaved differently. Too clean, too organized. At first, it was dismissed as interference, a calibration error, a software artifact. Those happen all the time. But then another telescope saw it, from a different angle, using different instruments, and the anomaly remained, not as noise, as structure. Buried inside layers of cosmic data, something appeared that didn't match anything natural we've ever cataloged. A megastructure colossal in a circular, ring-like configuration, with geometric segments clearly visible, artificial luminous edges, and one distinct internal detail, sharply defined. The same point that later would be highlighted, circled, pointed at, as if it mattered more than the rest. That detail didn't drift, didn't blur, didn't degrade with distance. It stayed exactly where it was. At first, estimates were conservative. Too conservative. The structure was said to be large, then unusually large. Then the wording changed. Larger than expected, larger than models allowed. Eventually, someone ran the numbers they weren't supposed to run. The result didn't make sense. The megastructure, circular, ring-like, segmented, luminous at the edges, with that same internal highlighted point, was not the size of a planet, not the size of a star. It was larger than a solar system. Not metaphorically, literally. That calculation existed briefly. Then it was revised. Public databases updated quietly. Files overwritten. Values normalized. If you checked one day and checked again a week later, you might have noticed the numbers were smaller. Not by much. Just enough. Enough to make the conclusion less disturbing. Researchers who had commented openly stopped commenting. Threads ended mid-discussion. Emails went unanswered. No announcement followed. No press conference. No denial. Just silence. And silence in science is rarely accidental. The object, that colossal circular, ring-shaped megastructure with visible geometric segmentation, artificial glowing borders, and the same internal marked detail, was still there. But the language around it changed. Instead of structure, reports began using words like formation. Instead of geometry, they used alignment. Instead of artificial, they used nothing at all. Because saying nothing is safer than saying the wrong thing. What unsettled some observers wasn't the size. It was the order. Natural objects are chaotic, messy, violent. This was. Every segment of the ring aligned with mathematical precision. Distances repeated. Angles mirrored each other. The luminous edges weren't random emissions. They followed the curvature too perfectly. And that internal detail, the same one always marked, circled, pointed at, appeared to be positioned with intent. Not at the center, not at the edge, exactly where it would be if it served a function. That idea was never written in any official document, but it was implied. And then the timestamp started to shift. Archived images from years prior were reprocessed. Suddenly, faint traces of the same ring-like megastructure with segmented geometry and glowing artificial borders could be found, barely visible, dismissed before as lens artifacts. It hadn't arrived recently. It had been there. Watching data suggested it wasn't moving relative to surrounding galaxies. Everything else drifted. It stayed fixed. That alone should have prompted global attention. Instead, there was nothing. No clarification. No correction. No explanation. Just a growing sense among a small group of people that something enormous had been noticed and then deliberately minimized. Because sometimes the most alarming discovery isn't that something exists. It's that someone already knows and decided you didn't need to. As more data was quietly reprocessed, something else emerged. Not size, not brightness, pattern. The megastructure, circular, ring-like, with visible geometric segments, artificial luminous edges, and the same distinct internal highlighted detail, wasn't isolated. At first glance, it appeared alone, a singular anomaly. But when astronomers adjusted their filters, when they stopped looking for objects and started looking for relationships, the picture changed. The structure aligned with points that shouldn't have mattered. Distant quasars, inactive stars, empty regions of space. Lines drawn between them formed angles that repeated too often to be coincidence. Not perfectly, but close enough to be unsettling. Some called it pareidolia, the human tendency to see patterns where none exist. That explanation worked until it didn't, because the same angular relationships appeared again and again, across different datasets, different wavelengths, different observatories. The circular, ring-shaped megastructure with segmented geometry and glowing artificial borders seemed to sit at the center of a larger mathematical conversation, not emitting messages, not signaling, simply existing in the right place. When simulations were run backward, the results became harder to dismiss. The structure's position was not random in galactic time. It occupied a location that would have been optimal millions of years ago, and millions of years from now. As if whoever placed it, if it was placed, didn't think in decades or centuries. They thought in epochs. That raised a question one wanted to ask directly. If this was natural, why did it behave like infrastructure? The luminous edges weren't flares or radiation leaks. They followed the segmented geometry with surgical precision. Each segment of the ring mirrored the others, but not redundantly. Variations existed, subtle, purposeful, and the internal detail, the same one always marked, always circled, showed anomalous readings. Not stronger, not weaker, different, as if that point interacted with space itself in a way the rest of the structure did not. No one labeled it a core. No one called it a control node. But those words appeared in private notes, in simulations never published. Then came the quiet revisions. Distances adjusted slightly. Mass estimates softened. Energy readings smoothed out. Nothing dramatic, just enough to make the structure seem less deliberate. Yet the geometry didn't change. The megastructure, colossal, circular, ring-like, segmented, luminous at the edges, with that same internal marked detail, remained mathematically stubborn. Perfect symmetry is rare in nature. Perfect symmetry at that scale is almost non-existent. And repetition across light years, that borders on something else. Some researchers began comparing the patterns to systems we already understood. Power distribution grids, orbital collectors, information relays. Not directly, carefully, using phrases like analogous to and conceptually similar, always followed by disclaimers. This doesn't imply design. This doesn't suggest intent. But intent has a way of leaking through equations. One simulation tested a disturbing possibility. What if the structure wasn't isolated? What if it wasn't a monument? What if it was a node? When that assumption was entered, the math became simpler, cleaner. The ring-like megastructure with geometric segmentation and artificial luminous borders suddenly made sense as part of a network. Not a local one, a distributed one, spanning distances that made human exploration feel microscopic. That idea was never published. The file exists, briefly. Then it didn't. Its author stopped presenting at conferences, stopped responding to collaborators. No scandal, no accusation, just absence. What frightened those who noticed wasn't suppression. It was restraint, as if someone, somewhere, understood that panic would be inefficient. Better to slow the conversation, blur the edges, let curiosity decay naturally. But curiosity doesn't decay. It accumulates. And once you see a pattern, it's hard to unsee it. Especially when the pattern keeps repeating. Especially when it looks less like chaos and more like planning. Eventually, a question surfaced. Quietly, carefully. What if the structure wasn't meant to be seen? What if the megastructure, colossal, circular, ring-like, with visible geometric segments, artificial luminous edges, and that same distinct internal highlighted detail, wasn't an object in the way we understand objects? What if it was equipment? Natural phenomena don't optimize. They explode. They collapse. They waste energy. This didn't. Energy readings around the ring followed gradients that looked managed. Not harvested. Not drained. Regulated. The luminous edges were not constant. They fluctuated in controlled intervals. Not random pulses. Not stellar noise. Cycles. Slow. Deliberate. As if responding to inputs we don't measure yet. That internal detail, always the same one, always marked, became harder to ignore. Its emissions didn't match the rest of the structure. They preceded them by fractions of a second, almost as if the rest of the ring reacted to it. No one called it a control point, but simulations treated it like one. When models assumed the ring-like megastructure with segmented geometry and glowing artificial borders was a functional system, calculations stopped breaking. Energy balances aligned. Thermal behavior stabilized. Even gravitational anomalies smoothed out. It was disturbing how cooperative the math became. The most unsettling theory wasn't dramatic. It was practical. That the structure could be involved in the collection of something. Not necessarily energy. Energy is loud, messy. Information is quiet. Information leaves subtle traces. And the universe is full of signals we barely notice. Radiation, particle flux, gravitational waves, all passing through space constantly, all carrying data. What if the megastructure, circular, segmented, luminous with that internal highlighted detail, wasn't extracting? What if it was listening? That idea wasn't written down. It circulated verbally, between people who trusted each other. Barely. Then someone asked a more difficult question. If this is a collector, what is it collecting for? That's where the scale shifted. Because once you assume function, you have to assume context. And context implies more than one component. One node doesn't make a system, unless it's part of something larger. When astronomers expanded their search criteria, looking not for identical structures but for compatible ones, they found hints. Not confirmations. Hints. Regions where space curved slightly too evenly. Zones where background radiation dipped in repeating intervals. Nothing conclusive, but suggestive. as if the ring-like megastructure with geometric segmentation and artificial luminous borders was one station among many, a single point in a distributed architecture, not spanning a star system, spanning the galaxy, or beyond. The thought was shelved quickly, not because it was impossible, but because it implied something uncomfortable. Civilizations like ours explore. We send probes. We observe. We map. But civilizations that operate at that scale wouldn't explore. They would manage. They wouldn't visit. They would monitor. And monitoring doesn't require presence, only infrastructure. The silence from official channels deepened. Reports grew vague. Language softened. Funding shifted elsewhere, as if attention itself was being redirected. What troubled some researchers most wasn't fear. It was familiarity. The structure behaved the way advanced systems behave. Redundancy, efficiency, longevity, design choices made by something that expects to last. Longer than species, longer than stars. And the megastructure, colossal, circular, ring-like, segmented, luminous at the edges, with that same internal marked detail, continued to sit there, unmoving, unconcerned, as if it had always been there, and always would be. After the theories began circulating quietly, something else became noticeable. Not a response, a pattern of non-response. Institutions didn't deny the existence of the megastructure, colossal, circular, ring-like, with visible geometric segments, artificial luminous edges, and that same distinct internal highlighted detail. They simply stopped talking about it. Reports that once mentioned anomalies were rewritten. The word structure vanished, replaced by feature. Artificial became unconfirmed, then disappeared entirely. Technical papers grew cautious to the point of emptiness. Entire paragraphs said nothing while appearing to say something. Phrases like data inconclusive. Further study required. No evidence of non-natural origin. Not because evidence was lacking, but because conclusions were being deferred indefinitely. Press inquiries received carefully neutral replies. No spokesperson ever said the object wasn't important. They just never said it was. Funding committees redirected grants towards safer topics. Planetary science, near-Earth objects, exoplanet atmospheres, anything closer, anything manageable, as if distance itself was the problem. Some astronomers noticed that internal discussions continued, quietly, behind closed channels. But the tone changed. No urgency, no excitement, only restraint, as if everyone involved understood the same unspoken rule. Don't frame it as discovery. Frame it as background. The ring-like megastructure with segmented geometry and glowing artificial borders was treated less like an object and more like an environmental constant. Something you work around, not something you question. The most unsettling documents weren't classified. They were public because they said so little. Ambiguity became the official position. Ambiguity buys time, and time is valuable when you don't know what you're dealing with. No one wanted to be the first to name it. Names create responsibility. Names imply intent. So it remained unnamed. Just a line in a dataset, a footnote, a reference point. And that internal detail, the same one always marked, always highlighted, was never addressed directly. It was cropped out of some images, blurred in others, not erased, just softened, enough that a casual observer wouldn't ask why it mattered. The absence of alarm was itself alarming. Because when humanity encounters something it truly doesn't understand, it usually reacts loudly. This time it didn't. It acted mature, measured, as if someone had already run through the possible outcomes and decided silence was optimal. And that led to an uncomfortable interpretation. That whatever this colossal circular, ring-shaped megastructure with geometric segmentation and artificial luminous edges was, it didn't represent a threat in the conventional sense. Threats provoke defense. This provoked caution, observation, distance, the kind of response you have when you suspect you're already inside someone else's system. When you realize that reacting emotionally would only reveal more about you than about it. The universe didn't feel empty anymore. It felt organized, quietly, and not around us, but around something else. At some point, the discussion stopped being about discovery and became about position. Humanity has a habit of assuming it stands at the center of every narrative. We explore, we observe, we analyze, we assume the universe is waiting to be understood. But the existence of a megastructure, colossal, circular, ring-like, with visible geometric segments, artificial luminous edges, and that same distinct internal highlighted detail, suggests a different possibility. That we didn't arrive early. That we arrived late. Civilizations like ours send probes into the dark, hopping to find something. Civilizations capable of structures like this wouldn't need to hope. They would already know. Exploration is a phase. Management comes after. You don't manage chaos. You manage systems. The structure's stillness became harder to ignore. It didn't react to us, didn't adjust, didn't acknowledge. It behaved like infrastructure that had already accounted for variables long before we existed, including us. The scale alone forces perspective. A ring that size, segmented with precision, glowing at its edges in ways that imply artificial control, with a single internal detail positioned exactly where it needs to be. That isn't built in response to curiosity. It's built in response to necessity. Something that large doesn't exist for spectacle. It exists because something depends on it. And dependency implies continuity. Timeframes that dwarf civilizations. Extinction events. Galactic cycles. If this circular, ring-shaped megastructure with geometric segmentation and artificial luminous borders is part of a system, then the system didn't begin with us. And it won't end with us. That realization reframes everything. We don't appear as targets. We appear as background. Variables inside an environment we don't control. The silence from official sources makes more sense under that lens. You don't announce the presence of a system you don't understand. You observe it, quietly, carefully, because observation reveals intent, and intent reveals vulnerability. Perhaps the most unsettling idea is also the simplest, that no one is hiding this from us out of malice. They're hiding it because there's nothing to be done. No negotiation, no confrontation, no warning. You don't confront a system that doesn't register you as a problem. You don't warn people about something that isn't attacking, because panic would only expose how small we are. Civilizations like ours explore because we're uncertain. Civilizations capable of building structures like this don't explore. They curate. They regulate. They ensure continuity. And you don't manage something unless, at some level, it already belongs to you. The megastructure, colossal, circular, ring-like, segmented, luminous at the edges, with that same internal marked detail, remains exactly where it has always been. Unmoved, unchanged, patient, and maybe the most disturbing thought isn't that something is watching. It's that nothing needs to, because the system is already in place, and we are already inside it. Not conquered, not contacted, just included.